Taeho Kim stepped out of the transport shuttle and felt his breath catch in his throat. The Galactic Senate chambers stretched before him like a massive cathedral made of crystal and metal. Light from 3 different suns streamed through the transparent dome above, casting rainbow patterns across the polished floors. Impressive, isn't it? Security Chief Mirai Park walked beside him, her black uniform crisp and professional. First time seeing the real thing? Taeho nodded, adjusting his formal diplomatic jacket. He had seen pictures and videos during his training on Earth, but nothing had prepared him for the actual scale. The chamber could hold representatives from over 200 different species, each section designed for different atmospheric and gravitational needs. "The meeting starts in 1 hour," Mirai said, checking her tablet. "Your seat is in Section C between the water breathers and the methane group." As they walked deeper into the chamber, Taeho began to notice something strange. Every alien delegate he saw was wearing what looked like thick armor. Not ceremonial robes or formal wear, but actual protective gear that covered them completely from head to toe. A tall, crystalline being shuffled past them, its body encased in a silver suit that hummed with energy. Behind it, a group of floating creatures moved inside transparent mechanical shells that sparked with electricity. Even the delegates that looked somewhat human-like were wrapped in layers of protective material. "Mirai," Taeho said quietly, "why is everyone wearing armor?" She glanced around and lowered her voice. "It's standard protocol for Senate sessions. All species are required to wear protective gear during formal meetings." "All species?" Taeho looked down at his simple black suit. "Where's mine?" Mirai stopped walking and faced him. Her expression was carefully neutral, the way it got when she was about to deliver news that might be complicated. "Humans have a special exemption from the armor requirement." "What kind of exemption?" "The other species specifically requested that humans attend sessions without protective gear." She started walking again, moving faster now. "It's in the diplomatic protocols. Section 15, paragraph 204. Taeho frowned. That didn't make any sense. If everyone else needed protection, why would humans be the exception? Were they considered less dangerous, more trustworthy? They reached his assigned area, and Taeho noticed immediately that his seat was positioned with unusual spacing around it. While other delegates sat close together in their sections, his chair was surrounded by at least 10 feet of empty space in every direction. "Is there a reason I'm sitting alone?" he asked. "Standard precautions," Mirai said. "Nothing personal." Before Taeho could ask what that meant, a loud chime echoed through the chamber. Delegates began filing in from various entrances, and the noise level rose as hundreds of different species communicated in their native languages. The translation devices built into the chamber created a constant background hum as they worked to convert everything into understandable speech. Taeho took his seat and watched the other delegates settle into their positions. The Vorthak crystalline. Beings clinked softly as their armor pieces adjusted. The Nethrim gas creatures floated in their mechanical suits, occasionally releasing small puffs of colored vapor. A group of insect-like beings clicked and buzzed inside what looked like small tanks. The session began with routine announcements. Trade agreements were reviewed. Territorial disputes were discussed in careful, formal language. Everything seemed normal, except for the way other delegates kept glancing in his direction. About 30 minutes into the meeting, the chamber began to warm up. The combined body heat and energy output from so many different life forms was making the temperature rise. Taeho loosened his tie and unbuttoned his jacket. The reaction was immediate and startling. Alarm sounds began beeping from at least 20 different armor suits. Several delegates near his section suddenly powered up defensive shields that glowed, bright blue and red. A few of the flying species quickly moved higher, putting more distance between themselves and the human section. "Attention!" came an announcement over the chamber speakers. "Human delegate, please minimize physical movement. Repeat, minimize physical movement." Taiho froze with his jacket half off. He looked around in confusion as security officers moved closer to his position. Mirai appeared at his side within seconds, her hand resting on her communication device. "What did I do?" he whispered. "Just put your jacket back on slowly," she said quietly. Very slowly, Taiho carefully pulled his jacket back over his shoulders and buttoned it up. The alarm sounds gradually stopped, and the defensive shields powered down. Conversation slowly resumed, but he noticed that even more delegates were now facing his direction. "I don't understand," he said to Mirai. "I was just getting warm." She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. Sudden movements and clothing changes are interpreted as threat displays by most species. When you started removing your jacket, their armor systems registered it as potential aggressive behavior. Aggressive behavior? I was just taking off a jacket. I know, but you have to remember, most of these species don't think the way humans do. Their evolutionary backgrounds are very different from ours. Taiho spent the rest of the session sitting perfectly still, afraid to even scratch his nose. He watched as other delegates moved freely within their armor, gestured broadly during speeches, and interacted normally with each other. But every time he shifted slightly in his seat, he noticed sensors turning in his direction. During a break in the proceedings, he overheard a conversation between two Kethran delegates in the section next to his. Their armor had external speakers. That translated their communication. "The human seems calm today," one said. "Yes, but you can never be sure. Did you see how quickly it moved to remove its outer covering? No warning at all. Typical predator behavior. They strike without signaling their intentions." Taiho felt a chill run down his spine. Predator behavior? They thought he was a predator? When? The session ended. Delegates began filing out in organized groups. Taiho noticed that his section was cleared last, with security personnel maintaining a careful watch as he gathered his materials and stood up. Mirai escorted him out through a separate exit from the main flow of traffic. As they walked through the quieter corridors, Taiho finally asked the question that had been building in his mind all day. "Mirai, why are they afraid of me?" She was quiet for a long moment. "It's complicated, Taiho. Humans have a reputation in the galaxy. Not a bad reputation exactly, but a very specific one." "What kind of reputation?" "The kind that makes other species feel safer when there's some distance involved." They reached the human diplomatic quarters, a small section of the station designed for Earth representatives. The walls were painted in earth tones, and the artificial gravity was set to Earth standard. It felt like home after the strange environment of the Senate chambers. "Tomorrow will be easier," Mirai said. "You'll get used to the protocols." After she left, Taiho sat in his small apartment and reviewed the day's events. He thought about the alarm systems, the defensive shields, the carefully maintained distance between his seat and everyone else's. He had come to the Galactic Senate to represent humanity in diplomatic discussions. He had expected language barriers, cultural differences, maybe some political disagreements. He had not expected to be treated like a dangerous animal that needed to be watched at all times. Tomorrow, he decided, he would start looking for answers. 2 weeks had passed since Taiho's first day in the Senate chambers. He had learned to move very slowly, keep his hands visible at all times, and never remove any piece of clothing during sessions. The other delegates seemed slightly more comfortable with his presence, though they still maintained their distance. Today's session was focused on trade route disputes between 3 different species. The Kethran Empire wanted exclusive mining rights in the Outer Spiral. The Moravian Collective claimed the same territory for their expansion plans. The Zephyrian Republic was caught in the middle, trying to maintain peace between their 2 largest trading partners. Taiho found the discussion fascinating. Each species had completely different approaches to negotiation. The Kethrans spoke in formal, military-style declarations. The Moravians communicated through harmonic tones that their translation systems converted into poetry-like statements. The Zephyrians seemed to prefer long, detailed explanations that covered every possible angle. Commander Zix Thala, the lead Kethran delegate, was an imposing figure even inside his thick armor. His suit was dark green with gold markings that indicated his military rank. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "The Kethran Empire has prior claim to the mining rights," he declared, standing at his position in the chamber. "Our survey teams discovered the mineral deposits in question. Our workers established the initial extraction facilities. The territory rightfully belongs to us." Hive Node Beta 7, representing the Moravian Collective, responded with a series of musical tones that translated as, "Claims of discovery ring hollow when the songs of our ancestors spoke of these places long before your ships flew between. Stars." The Zephyrian delegate, Ambassador Kelvash, tried to find middle ground. "Perhaps a sharing arrangement could benefit all parties. The territory is vast enough for multiple operations." The debate continued for over an hour. Taiho watched the careful dance of diplomacy, noting how each species maintained their physical positions throughout the discussion. No one moved closer to another delegate's section. No one made sudden gestures. Even when voices were raised, bodies remained perfectly still. During a brief recess, delegates were allowed to move around the chamber for refreshments and private conversations. Taiho stayed in his seat as he had learned that his movement tended to make others nervous, but he enjoyed watching the interactions between different species. That's when the incident happened. Commander Zixathala was walking back to his section after speaking with some Zephyrian representatives. His path took him past the Moravian area, where Hive Node Beta 7 was floating in its mechanical containment unit. The chamber was crowded with delegates returning to their positions. As Zixthala passed the Moravian section, his armored shoulder brushed against Beta 7's containment unit. The contact lasted less than a second and appeared to be completely accidental. Both delegates were moving in different directions and simply didn't see each other in time to avoid the minor collision. The reaction was immediate and extreme. Alarms began sounding from both the Kethran and Moravian sections. Emergency lights flashed red and yellow. Security officers rushed toward both delegates. Other representatives quickly moved away from the area, creating a wide circle around the 2 involved parties. "Unprovoked assault!" Zixthala's voice boomed through his armor's external speakers. "The Moravian unit has made aggressive contact." Beta 7's response came as a series of sharp, discordant tones that translated as, "Violence initiated by Kethran military. Protective measures required immediately." Within minutes, the situation had escalated far beyond what Taiho could have imagined. Diplomatic officials from both species were demanding formal investigations. Military attachés were called in to review security footage. Emergency protocols were activated for what the chamber's computer system classified as a hostile diplomatic incident. Tejo watched in amazement as mediators, legal experts, and cultural specialists swarmed around the two delegates. What had clearly been an accident was being treated like an act of war. "Session suspended pending full investigation," announced the Senate's chief arbiter, a tall being with purple skin and 4 arms. "All parties will remain in position until security review is complete." For the next 4 hours, Tejo sat in his chair and observed the most detailed investigation he had ever seen. Frame-by-frame analysis of security recordings, testimony from dozens of witnesses, expert opinions on the cultural implications of uninvited physical contact between Kethran and Moravian individuals. The conclusion reached by the mediators was that both parties were victims of an unfortunate accident. Neither delegate had intended to make contact with the other. The collision was the result of poor traffic flow planning in the chamber's central area, but the aftermath required even more time and effort. Formal apology protocols had to be established. The exact wording of each species' statement was debated for hours. Cultural experts explained the deep significance of physical contact in both societies. Compensation discussions began for the psychological trauma that both delegates might have experienced. "This is insane," Tejo muttered to himself as he watched legal specialists argue about whether the contact constituted a brush, a bump, or a collision, and how each term carried different implications under galactic law. "Excuse me, human delegate," came a voice from beside him. A security officer in white armor had approached his position. "Did you make a verbal statement regarding the ongoing proceedings?" "I just said this was insane," Tejo replied. "Because it is. They barely touched each other. It was obviously an accident. They should just apologize to each other and move on." The security officer's helmet turned toward him with a mechanical whirring sound. "You are suggesting that the delegates should make physical contact as part of the resolution process." "No, I meant they should shake hands and—" "Wait, no, not literally shake hands. I meant they should just agree that it was an accident and forgive each other. Forgiveness protocols require formal mediation and cultural approval processes," the officer said. "Physical contact suggestions are not appropriate for this situation." Before Tejo could explain that he wasn't actually suggesting physical contact, he heard his words being transmitted over the security communications system. Within moments, another wave of alarm sounds filled the chamber. "Attention all delegates," came an announcement. "The human representative has suggested resolution through physical contact between affected parties. This is not an officially sanctioned mediation technique. Please disregard the human suggestion and continue with standard protocols." Tejo felt every sensor in the chamber turn toward him. Delegates who had been focused on the original incident now shifted their attention to what he had said. Security Chief Jinwoo Lee appeared at his side almost instantly. "We need to get you out of here," Jinwoo said quietly. "Now." "What did I do wrong?" "You suggested that 2 traumatized delegates should make physical contact with each other. That's considered a form of diplomatic assault recommendation in most cultures." As Jinwoo escorted him out of the chamber, Tejo heard the mediators beginning new discussions about whether his suggestion constituted interference in the resolution process. Legal experts were being called in to determine if suggesting physical contact between other species violated any diplomatic protocols. In the corridor outside the chamber, Jinwoo stopped and faced him. "Tejo, you have to understand something. What humans consider normal social interaction is seen as aggressive or dangerous behavior by most of the galaxy." "I was trying to help. I know." But when you suggest that beings from different species should have physical contact with each other, you're essentially suggesting they should engage in what their cultures consider combat behavior. Tejo leaned against the wall and rubbed his forehead. So that bump between the Kethran and the Moravian, from their perspective, they just attacked each other. The fact that it was accidental doesn't change the psychological impact. Their species didn't evolve to handle unexpected physical contact the way humans did. As they walked back toward the human quarters, Tejo could hear the ongoing discussions echoing from the chamber behind them. The original incident was still being investigated. His suggestion had added another layer of complexity to the situation. Tomorrow's headlines in the Galactic News would report that a minor collision between two delegates had created a diplomatic crisis that required 6 hours to resolve, and that the human representative had made the situation worse by suggesting violence as a solution. Tejo was beginning to understand that representing humanity in the galaxy was going to be much more complicated than he had expected. After the incident in the Senate chamber, Tejo knew he needed answers. He couldn't continue representing humanity without understanding why his most basic social instincts seemed to terrify every other species in the galaxy. The next morning, he sent a message to Dr. Suyon Cho, the only human working in the Galactic Archives Division. Dr. Cho was a small woman in her 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She had been living on the station for over 10 years, longer than any other human diplomat or researcher. If anyone understood the complexities of human-alien relations, it would be her. They met in her office deep within the archives section, surrounded by towers of data crystals and holographic displays showing historical documents from hundreds of different worlds. The space felt cramped compared to the open areas of the Senate chambers, but it was quiet and private. "I've been expecting you," Dr. Cho said as Tejo entered. "Word travels fast when humans make suggestions about physical contact in diplomatic settings." "I didn't mean anything by it," Tejo said, taking a seat across from her desk. "I was just trying to help resolve the situation." "I know. And that's exactly the problem." She activated a holographic display that showed a complex chart filled with species names, evolutionary timelines, and behavioral classifications. "Tell me, Tejo, what do you know about human evolution compared to other galactic species?" "The basics from my diplomatic training. Humans evolved from hunter-gatherers on Earth. Most other species have different evolutionary backgrounds." "That's putting it mildly." Dr. Cho manipulated the display, zooming in on Earth's section. "Humans evolved as persistence hunters and social pack animals. We developed complex cooperation strategies, physical teamwork, and comfort with touching members of our own species. Now look at this." The display shifted to show evolutionary trees for other major galactic civilizations. Tejo studied the information, and a pattern began to emerge. "They're all prey species," he said slowly. "Not all, but most. The Kethrans evolved from herd animals that were hunted by pack predators. The Moravians developed from small creatures that had to hide from larger threats. The Zephyrians came from tree-dwelling animals that avoided ground-based dangers. Even the species that weren't technically prey animals evolved as solitary creatures or in small family groups." Dr. Cho brought up another display showing brain scan comparisons between humans and other species. "This is where it gets interesting. Most galactic species have enhanced fight-or-flight responses compared to humans. Physical contact with unfamiliar individuals triggers massive stress reactions in their nervous systems. But they interact with each other all the time in the Senate, with armor, Dr. Cho emphasized. The protective suits don't just guard against physical harm. They create a psychological barrier that allows these species to be in the same space without triggering their survival instincts. She activated a restricted access file that required her personal authorization codes. What I'm about to show you is classified information from the early days of human contact with the galactic community. This is why the armor protocols exist. The display showed historical records from humanity's first diplomatic missions over 50 years ago. Taiho read through reports of failed negotiations, psychological breakdowns among alien delegates, and several incidents where simple human gestures had caused what the documents called species-wide panic responses. The Terran touch incident, Dr. Cho said, highlighting one particular file. Ambassador Sarah Chen, one of the first human diplomats, attempted to shake hands with a Vorthak delegate during a trade negotiation. The physical contact caused the Vorthak to enter what their species calls death shock. It took their medical teams 3 hours to revive him. Taiho read through the incident report. The handshake had lasted less than 2 seconds, but the Vorthak delegate had experienced what their doctors classified as a complete nervous system shutdown. The incident had nearly caused the Vorthak Empire to declare war on Earth. It gets worse, Dr. Cho continued, showing more files. Human children playing games caused an entire Moravian colony to evacuate their settlement. A human athlete celebrating a victory by hugging his teammate sent 12 different species representatives into medical emergency care. We didn't understand what we were doing to them. She brought up a document titled Psychological Impact Assessment, Human Physical Interaction Protocols. The report was hundreds of pages long and contained detailed studies of how human behavior affected other species. According to this research, humans are classified as apex social predators in the galactic database, Dr. Cho explained. We're the only known species that developed complex societies based on physical cooperation with non-family members. Most species only make physical contact for mating, territorial disputes, or life-or-death situations. Taiho thought about his own childhood. Games of tag, wrestling with friends, sports that involved physical contact, hugging relatives and friends. All of these normal human activities would be seen as aggressive or inappropriate by most galactic species. So the armor requirement was established to protect other species from us, Dr. Cho finished. Not to protect us from them. The armor creates a buffer zone that allows them to function normally in our presence. She showed him more recent studies that tracked stress hormone levels in various species during Senate sessions. The data showed that when humans were present without armor, other delegates experienced elevated stress responses even when the humans were sitting perfectly still. But why don't we wear armor too? Taiho asked. Because it doesn't help. The other species are afraid of human behavior patterns, not human physical capabilities. Putting armor on a human just creates a more frightening version of what they're already scared of. A predator in protective gear is still a predator. Dr. Cho brought up one final document, the current diplomatic protocols governing human participation in galactic affairs. Taiho read through the long list of restrictions and guidelines that had been developed over decades of trial and error. Humans are allowed to participate in galactic diplomacy under special conditions, she explained. We must maintain physical distance from other delegates. We cannot make sudden movements. We cannot suggest physical contact as a solution to conflicts. We cannot display teeth when expressing positive emotions, because most species interpret that as a threat display. Smiling is considered threatening? To species that evolved as prey animals, yes. Showing teeth is usually associated with predators about to attack. Taiho understood now why his attempt to help resolve the collision incident had caused such a reaction. To the other delegates, he had suggested that two traumatized individuals should engage in what their instincts told them was combat behavior. "There's something else you should know," Dr. Cho said, lowering her voice even though they were alone in her office. "There's a growing movement among some of the younger generation of alien species. They call themselves the Adaptation Coalition. They believe that their species need to evolve beyond their instinctual fears of physical contact." She showed him underground publications and research papers written by young aliens who were studying human behavior and arguing that their species were limiting their own potential by avoiding physical cooperation. "It's controversial," she explained. "Most of their governments consider it dangerous thinking, but there are some who believe that learning to interact with humans without armor could be the next step in galactic evolution." Taiho spent the next 2 hours reading through the historical documents and research studies. By the end of their meeting, he had a completely different understanding of his role as a human diplomat. "So I'm not here to represent human interests in galactic politics," he said finally. "Not exactly. You're here to prove that humans can exist peacefully alongside other species without triggering their survival instincts. Every day you spend in that Senate chamber without causing a panic is a small victory for human-alien relations." As Taiho walked back to his quarters, he thought about everything he had learned. Humanity wasn't just different from other galactic species. They were fundamentally incompatible on a biological level. The fact that any cooperation existed at all was a testament to the patience and effort of both sides. Tomorrow, when he returned to the Senate chamber, he would see the armor-clad delegates differently. They weren't protecting themselves from potential violence. They were protecting themselves from their own evolutionary programming that told them humans were dangerous predators. And in a way, he realized, their instincts weren't entirely wrong. Humans were predators. They had just learned to hunt for cooperation and friendship instead of food. 3 weeks after his meeting with Dr. Cho, Taiho felt more confident about his role in the Senate. He understood now why other delegates reacted the way they did to his presence. He had learned to move slowly, keep his expressions neutral, and avoid any suggestion of physical interaction. His daily reports to Earth showed steady improvement in interspecies comfort levels. Tonight was the quarterly diplomatic reception, a formal social event where delegates from different species could interact in a more relaxed setting than the Senate chambers. Taiho had attended one before, spending most of the evening standing alone near the refreshment area, while armored delegates maintained careful distances from each other. The reception hall was decorated with holographic displays showing peaceful scenes from various homeworlds. Soft music played from hidden speakers, carefully chosen to be pleasant to most species' hearing ranges. The lighting was kept dim to accommodate species with sensitive vision. Taiho wore his best formal uniform and had practiced his diplomatic posture in front of a mirror. Hands visible, movements slow and deliberate, facial expressions minimal. He had even learned to breathe more quietly after discovering that humans breathed much more audibly than most other species. Protocol Officer Hyunwoo Nam had briefed him extensively on reception etiquette. "Remember, no sudden movements, no approaching, other delegates without invitation, and absolutely no physical gestures of any kind. If someone falls down, do not offer to help them up. If someone drops something, do not pick it up for them. Any physical intervention will be interpreted as aggressive behavior." The evening started well. Taiho positioned himself in his designated area and observed the careful social interactions of different species. The Kethrans stood in rigid military formations even during casual conversation. The Moravians floated in complex patterns around their section of the room. The Zephyrians gathered in small groups, their translator devices creating a constant, gentle hum. About an hour into the reception, a group of younger delegates arrived. Taiho recognized some of them from the Senate sessions, junior representatives from various species who were still learning diplomatic protocols. Among them was Princess Veltara, a young Altarian who couldn't have been more than the equivalent of 18 years old in human terms. The Altarians were one of the more human-like species in the galaxy, though they breathed a different atmospheric mixture and required special regulators to survive in standard station atmosphere. Princess Veltara wore light armor compared to most delegates, and her helmet was partially transparent, allowing others to see her face. She had always seemed curious about humans during Senate sessions, while older delegates avoided looking. In Taiho's direction, she would sometimes turn her helmet toward him as if studying his behavior. Her questions during diplomatic discussions were intelligent and thoughtful. Tonight, she was part of a group of young delegates who were discussing trade policy reforms. Taiho could hear their conversation through the translation system, and he was impressed by their innovative thinking. They were proposing solutions that older, more traditional delegates would never consider. That's when the emergency happened. Princess Veltara was in the middle of making a point about resource allocation when her atmospheric regulator began making strange noises. The device attached to her armor was supposed to filter the station's air into something her species could breathe safely. Instead, it was clearly malfunctioning. She began coughing, a sound that came through her helmet's external speakers as distorted, static. Her movements became jerky and uncontrolled. The other young delegates in her group noticed something was wrong but seemed unsure how to help. Taiho watched as her breathing became more labored. The regulator was making clicking sounds that indicated it was failing completely. Princess Veltara reached toward her helmet controls, probably trying to switch to emergency reserves, but her movements were becoming uncoordinated. She was choking. Every instinct Taiho had developed over 30 years of life told him to help. A young person was in trouble, possibly dying, and he was the closest person who might be able to do something about it. He didn't think about diplomatic protocols or species differences or evolutionary psychology. He saw someone who needed help, and he moved. Taiho crossed the room in 4 quick steps and reached Princess Veltara just as she began to collapse. Her atmospheric regulator had completely failed, and she was suffocating in the station's normal atmosphere. He could see the emergency release mechanism on her helmet, but her hands were shaking too badly to operate it properly. Without hesitation, he reached out and activated the manual override that would flood her helmet with emergency oxygen from her armor's backup system. The moment his hands touched her armor, alarms began sounding throughout the reception hall. Emergency lights flashed, red. Security barriers activated around the entire area. Armed officers rushed toward them from multiple directions. The other delegates who had been socializing moments before were now backing away as quickly as their various forms of locomotion allowed. But Taiho was focused entirely on Princess Veltara. The emergency oxygen was flowing, but she was still having trouble breathing. Her helmet's internal display showed that her blood oxygen levels were dangerously low. He had no choice. He had to remove her helmet to get her proper medical attention. "I'm going to help you," he said, hoping she could understand him through the translation system. "Try to stay calm." As he worked to safely remove her helmet, the chaos around them intensified. Multiple species were shouting instructions in their native languages. Security teams were establishing containment perimeters. Medical emergency. Broadcasts were echoing through the station's communication system. Princess Veltara's helmet came free, and she immediately began breathing more easily in the station's atmosphere. Her species could survive without special breathing apparatus for short periods, and the emergency medical team that arrived moments later was able to stabilize her condition. But as she recovered, Taeho became aware of the situation developing around them. "Human delegate, step away from the Altarian immediately," commanded a security officer through a loudspeaker. "Do not make any additional physical contact." Taeho looked around and realized that he was surrounded by armed security personnel from at least 6 different species. Their weapons weren't aimed at him, but they were clearly ready to act if he made any sudden movements. "I was trying to save her life," he said. "Physical intervention without consent is classified as assault behavior under galactic law," the security officer replied. "Please move to the designated containment area while the incident is investigated." As Taeho was escorted away from the medical team treating Princess Veltara, he heard fragments of communication between various officials. "Unprovoked attack on junior delegate. Human engaged in contact behavior with armored individual. Possible predator response to vulnerable. Target, emergency protocols activated for diplomatic assault." Hyun-woo Nam appeared at his side as they reached the containment area, a small room adjacent to the reception hall. His expression was grim. "Taeho, do you understand what you've done? I saved someone's life. From their perspective, you attacked a young delegate who was in a vulnerable condition. The fact that you provided medical assistance is irrelevant under current protocols." Through the room's windows, Taeho could see medical teams treating Princess Veltara. She appeared to be recovering well, talking to the doctors and moving normally. But around her, diplomatic officials from the Altarian government were having intense discussions with station security. "What happens now?" Taeho asked. "There will be a formal tribunal," Hyun-woo said. 3 species are claiming that your actions constituted an attack on their junior representative. The Altarians will have to decide whether to press charges or accept your actions as medical assistance. And if they press charges, you could be banned from all future diplomatic activities. Humanity's participation in galactic affairs could be suspended. At worst, this could be considered an act of war. Taeho sat down heavily in one of the chairs. He had acted on pure instinct, doing what any human would do when they saw someone in danger. But in the context of galactic diplomacy, his life-saving actions were being treated as a violent assault. Hours later, after extensive interviews and testimony from multiple witnesses, the tribunal reached its conclusion. Princess Veltara herself testified that Taeho's actions had saved her life, and that she had not felt threatened by his assistance. The charges were dropped, but new restrictions were placed on human diplomatic activity. From now on, humans would not be allowed to provide physical assistance to other species under any circumstances, even during medical emergencies. As Taeho returned to his quarters late that night, he realized that he had saved one life, but potentially made life more difficult for every human diplomat who would come after him. The gap between human instincts and galactic protocols seemed wider than ever. The formal reprimand from the Diplomatic Council arrived 3 days after the reception incident. Taeho read through the official language expressing concern about human behavioral patterns and the need for enhanced cultural sensitivity training. The document was polite but clear. One more incident and his diplomatic status would be revoked. Instead of feeling discouraged, Taeho felt more determined than ever to understand the deep roots of the problem. Dr. Cho had given him a general overview, but he needed to dig deeper. He wanted to understand exactly how humanity had become the galaxy's most feared diplomatic partners. He contacted Dr. Eunji Han, a xenoanthropologist who worked in the station's research division. Dr. Han had spent years studying the behavioral patterns of different species and had published several papers on interspecies psychology. If anyone could help him understand the full scope of human-alien differences, it would be her. They met in Dr. Han's laboratory, a sterile white room filled with holographic displays showing brain scans, behavioral analysis charts, and evolutionary timelines. Dr. Han was a serious woman in her 40s who spoke with the precision of someone who dealt in scientific facts rather than diplomatic niceties. "I've been following your case," she said without preamble. The reception incident was predictable given standard human behavioral patterns. What's interesting is that you're still trying to understand the problem instead of simply following the restrictions. "I need to know why we're so different," Taiho said. "If I'm going to represent humanity effectively, I have to understand what we're dealing with." Dr. Han activated a massive holographic display that filled most of the room. It showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy with different colored markers indicating the homeworlds of various species. "Let's start with the basics," she said. Of the 237 species currently active in galactic politics, humans are the only ones classified as apex social predators. Do you understand what that classification means? Dr. Cho explained that humans evolved as pack hunters while most other species evolved as prey animals. That's part of it, but the classification goes much deeper. Dr. Han zoomed in on Earth's section of the map. Humans developed complex social structures based on physical cooperation between non-related individuals. You hunt in groups, play physical games together, and use touch as a form of social bonding. This is almost unique in the galaxy. She brought up comparative brain scans showing the differences between human neural structure and that of other species. Most galactic species have enhanced fear responses and minimal social bonding outside of family groups. They evolved to avoid physical contact with strangers because contact usually meant death. The display shifted to show behavioral analysis data from various species. Taiho studied the charts, seeing clear patterns in how different civilizations approached social interaction. The Kethrans evolved from herd animals that were hunted by pack predators very similar to early humans, Dr. Han explained. Their survival strategy was to maintain group cohesion while avoiding any contact with potential threats. When a Kethran sees human pack behavior, their instincts tell them they're looking at their ancestral enemy. She showed video recordings of various species in their natural habitats. The Moravians lived in small family units and avoided other groups entirely. The Zephyrians were solitary creatures that only gathered for mating seasons. The Vorthak were territorial and would fight to the death if forced into close proximity with strangers. "What about species that aren't prey animals?" Taiho asked. "There are a few apex predators among galactic species, but they evolved as solitary hunters. They're dangerous individually, but don't have pack instincts. Humans are the only species that developed cooperative hunting strategies combined with complex social bonding." Dr. Han brought up a restricted file labeled Terran Behavioral Assessment, classified. She entered her authorization codes and displayed a document that Taiho had never seen before. This is the complete psychological profile of humanity as understood by the Galactic Council, she said. It was compiled over 50 years of observation and interaction. Taiho read through the assessment, and some of the language made him uncomfortable. humans were described as extremely social predators with advanced pack-hunting instincts and capable of complex cooperative strategies that other species find threatening. But the most disturbing section dealt with human children. According to galactic behavioral experts, human child rearing practices would be classified as combat training by most species, Dr. Hahn said, highlighting relevant sections. Games of tag simulate pursuit hunting. Wrestling teaches grappling techniques. Team sports develop pack coordination skills. The document included video recordings of human children playing various games, along with analysis from alien psychologists. What looked like normal childhood fun was interpreted as advanced predator skill development and early socialization for group hunting behavior. "They think we're training our children to be killers," Taiho said quietly. "From their perspective, we are. A human child playing tag is learning the same skills that their ancestral predators used to hunt their ancestral prey." Dr. Hahn activated another display showing historical records from early human contact with various species. The Terran touch incident that Dr. Cho mentioned was just the beginning. There have been hundreds of smaller incidents over the years. She showed him report after report of failed diplomatic missions, human delegates who had caused panic by offering handshakes, human children whose playing had caused entire alien settlements to evacuate, human athletes whose victory celebrations had been interpreted as territorial displays. The worst incident happened 15 years ago, Dr. Hahn said, bringing up a heavily classified file. A human cultural exchange student was staying with a Vorthak family as part of a diplomatic program. The student was trying to be friendly and helpful. Taiho read through the incident report. The human student, a young woman named Jennifer Park, had been living with her host family for 2 weeks when she noticed that the family's youngest child was upset about something. Trying to comfort the child in the way humans naturally would, she had reached out and gently touched the child's shoulder. The result was catastrophic. The child went into shock. The parents interpreted the touch as an attack on their offspring. Within hours, local authorities had classified the incident as an attempted kidnapping by a predator species. The student was arrested and diplomatic. Relations between humans and the Vorthak Empire were suspended for 3 years. "She was just trying to comfort a sad child," Taiho said. "But to the Vorthak, predators touching their young is the most threatening behavior imaginable. It triggered every survival instinct they had." Dr. Hahn showed him more recent research that had been conducted on human-alien interactions. Scientists from various species had studied human behavior patterns and developed detailed threat assessment protocols. According to their research, humans display pack coordination signals even during normal conversation, she explained. "The way we maintain eye contact, mirror each other's postures, and use gestures to emphasize points, all of A. This reads as coordinated hunting behavior to species that evolved to fear pack predators." The research included detailed analysis of human facial expressions. Smiling, which humans use to express friendship and happiness, was universally interpreted by prey species as a threat display. Laughing was classified as victory vocalizations, similar to sounds made by predators after a successful hunt. Even our attempts at diplomacy are seen as threatening, Taiho realized. Exactly. When humans try to build rapport with other species through friendly conversation and positive body language, we're actually triggering their deepest fears. Dr. Hahn brought up one final set of documents. Research papers written by young aliens who were studying human behavior from a different perspective. These scientists, mostly from the younger generation, argued that their species' fears of humans were holding back galactic civilization. There's a growing movement among some alien scholars, she said. They call it evolutionary adaptation theory. The basic idea is that their species need to overcome their instinctual responses to humans in order to benefit from human cooperative abilities. The papers were fascinating. Young alien researchers had studied human achievements in science, technology, and social organization. They argued that humanity's pack coordination instincts were responsible for rapid technological development and effective large-scale cooperation. They think their species could benefit from learning human social skills, Dr. Hahn explained. But it's controversial because it requires overcoming millions of years of evolutionary programming. One paper particularly caught Taiho's attention. It was written by a young Moravian scientist who argued that his species' fear of physical cooperation was limiting their ability to conduct complex research projects. He proposed controlled exposure therapy to help Moravians overcome their instinctual responses to cooperative behavior. Is any of this research being taken seriously by their governments? Taiho asked. Not officially. Most established alien leaders consider it dangerous thinking. But there are small groups of young aliens who are experimenting with reduced armor protocols and limited cooperative. 2 months after his research session with Dr. Hahn, Taiho made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He volunteered to participate in an experimental study on human-alien interaction. The research was being conducted by Dr. Somin Kang, a xenopsychologist who specialized in interspecies behavioral therapy. The idea had come to him while reading the papers written by young alien scientists who believed their species could learn to overcome their fear responses to humans. If there was even a small chance that controlled interaction could help bridge the gap between humans and other species, he wanted to be part of it. Dr. Kang was initially hesitant to approve his participation. This isn't just diplomatic research. Taiho, we're asking alien volunteers to put themselves in situations that their entire evolutionary history tells them are life-threatening. If something goes wrong, it could set back human-alien relations by decades. And if something goes right, it could change everything, Taiho replied. The experimental chamber was located in the research section of the station, far from the diplomatic areas where most aliens spent their time. It was designed to monitor every aspect of the interactions: heart rates, stress hormone levels, brain activity, and behavioral responses. Multiple cameras recorded everything from different angles. Dr. Kang had spent weeks finding volunteers from various species who were willing to participate. Most were young scientists or researchers who had studied human behavior and were curious about direct interaction. All of them were aware that they would be experiencing situations their species considered dangerous. The first volunteer was researcher Kethvar, a young Kethran scientist who had written several papers on comparative evolutionary psychology. His armor was modified with additional sensors to monitor his physiological responses, and he had a direct communication link to medical teams standing by outside the chamber. We'll start with simple proximity, Dr. Kang explained through the chamber's communication system. Taiho will stand 10 feet away from you, Kethvar. Just try to remain calm and observe your reactions. Taiho entered the chamber and took his position across from the Kethran researcher. Even with 10 feet of distance between them, he could see Kethvar's armor systems activating defensive protocols. Warning lights flickered on the chest plate, and the helmet's breathing apparatus increased its cycling rate. Fascinating, Kethvar said through his external speakers, though his voice carried obvious stress. My threat assessment systems are registering maximum alert status even though I intellectually know you mean no harm. How are you feeling? Dr. Kang asked. Like I'm standing in front of a hunting pack. Kethvar replied honestly. Every instinct I have is telling me to either run or attack, but I'm managing to override those responses. They maintained the 10-foot distance for 5 minutes while Dr. Kang monitored the data. Kethvar's stress levels were extremely high, but they remained stable throughout the test. Excellent, Dr. Kang said. Now we'll try reducing the distance to 8 feet. As Taiho moved 2 feet closer, the reaction was immediate. Kethvar's armor systems began emitting warning sounds and his breathing became rapid and shallow. But he held his position. This is challenging, he said. The Predator proximity triggers are very strong. They continued the session, gradually reducing the distance between them. At 6 feet, Kethvar began showing signs of panic, but he requested to continue. At 4 feet, his medical monitors indicated that his stress response was approaching dangerous levels. That's enough for today, Dr. Kang announced. Kethvar, you've done remarkably well. As the Kethran researcher left the chamber, he paused at the door. Doctor, I'd like to schedule another session next week. This was terrifying, but also educational. The second volunteer was even more surprising. Hive Node Delta 9, a Moravian. Collective member had requested to participate despite her species' extreme sensitivity to individual interaction. Moravians typically existed as part of group consciousness and found individual contact deeply disturbing. This will be different, Dr. Kang warned. Moravians don't just fear physical contact, they fear individual consciousness itself. Just being alone with a human could trigger severe psychological trauma. Delta 9 floated in her containment unit at the far end of the chamber. Even from 15 feet away, her bio readings showed extreme stress levels. I have separated temporarily from the collective for this experiment, she said through translated harmonics. The isolation is uncomfortable. Adding human presence makes it much worse. We don't have to continue if you're not comfortable, Taiho said. No. My research indicates that Moravian fear responses may be limiting our species' development. I must gather data. They spent the session working on verbal communication. Taiho spoke in calm, quiet tones, while Delta 9 practiced responding as an individual rather than as part of her collective consciousness. The stress was clearly enormous for her, but she persevered. Human vocal patterns are less threatening than expected, she reported. The individual interaction remains deeply disturbing, but manageable for short periods. The most successful session came with the third volunteer, a young Zephyrian named Apprentice Kelmore. His species was naturally curious and had evolved from tree-dwelling creatures rather than ground-based prey animals. While still fearful of humans, Zephyrians seemed less traumatized by the interaction. Your movement patterns are different from what our databases indicate, Kelmore observed as Taiho walked slowly around the chamber. Less predatory than expected. How so? Predators in our homeworld move with focused intent, every step directed toward capturing prey. Your movements seem more exploratory, like you're gathering information rather than hunting. Dr. Kang was recording everything. This was the first time an alien had described human behavior in non-threatening terms. Would you be willing to try verbal interaction at close range? Dr. Kang asked. Kelmore agreed, and they gradually reduced the distance until Taiho was only 3 feet away. The young Zephyrian's stress levels were elevated but manageable. "This is remarkable," Kelmore said. "I can feel the fear response, but I can also recognize that it's irrational. You are clearly not preparing to attack me." "What makes you sure of that?" Taiho asked. "Your posture, your breathing pattern, the way you use your hands when speaking. Real predators don't behave this way when they're hunting." The breakthrough came during their 4th session together. Kellamore had been working with reduced armor, wearing only basic protective gear instead of a full containment suit. He had specifically requested to try the most challenging test of all. "I want to attempt brief physical contact," he announced. "Doctor," Kang immediately protested. "Kellamore, that's extremely dangerous. We have no data on how your species responds to human touch." "Which is exactly why we need the data." After extensive safety preparations and medical monitoring, they agreed to attempt a brief handshake. Taiho extended his hand slowly, and Kellamore reached out to meet it. The moment their hands touched, Kellamore's biological alarms activated. His stress response spiked to dangerous levels, and he began shaking uncontrollably. But instead of pulling away, he maintained the contact for a full 3 seconds. "Fascinating," he said afterward, though his voice was shaking. "The terror response was overwhelming, but I survived it. The touch did not harm me." That single handshake became the foundation for everything that followed. Within weeks, news of the successful human-alien physical contact had spread through the station's research community. Young scientists from multiple species began requesting to participate in similar experiments. Not all the tests were successful. Several volunteers had to be removed from experiments due to severe panic responses. One Vorthak researcher required medical intervention after attempting to be in the same room as Taiho for more than 5 minutes. But the successes were remarkable. A small group of young aliens had proven that it was possible to overcome millions of years of evolutionary programming through careful exposure and mental preparation. "The implications are staggering," Dr. Kang told Taiho after reviewing the data from dozens of sessions. "If even a small percentage of aliens can learn to interact with humans without armor, it could change the entire structure of galactic diplomacy." The research results were published in scientific journals throughout the galaxy, though they were met with skepticism and concern from many established governments. The idea that prey species could learn to interact safely with apex predators challenged fundamental assumptions about interspecies relations. But among younger generations of aliens, the research sparked intense interest. Underground groups began forming to study human behavior and practice interaction techniques. Some called themselves adaptation societies, while others preferred evolution clubs. Taiho had proven that the gap between humans and other species wasn't unbridgeable. It was just very, very wide, and crossing it required courage that few individuals possessed. But those few individuals might be enough to change the galaxy. 6 months after the successful interaction experiments, Taiho had settled into a routine that seemed to be working. His daily presence in the Senate chambers no longer caused mass panic. Several young alien researchers had requested meetings to discuss the interaction studies. There was even talk of establishing formal programs to help interested aliens overcome their fear responses to humans. Then the solar storm hit. It started as routine space weather, elevated radiation from the local star that would require minor adjustments to the station's shielding. But within hours, the storm had grown into something unprecedented. Massive waves of charged particles were overwhelming the station's protective systems, threatening to cause catastrophic failures in life support, power generation, and artificial gravity. Tejo was in his quarters when the first emergency announcement echoed through the station's communication system. All personnel report to designated safety areas immediately. Critical system failures detected in multiple sections. He made his way to the human diplomatic area, where Security Chief Jinwoo Lee was coordinating emergency responses with Earth authorities. The Situation Room was filled with holographic displays showing the storm's progression and the station's failing systems. "How bad is it?" Tejo asked. "Worse than anything we've seen before," Jinwoo replied grimly. "The radiation is overloading our primary shields. If we can't get the backup systems online within the next 4 hours, we'll have to evacuate the entire station." "What about the Senate session scheduled for today?" "Canceled. All diplomatic activities are suspended until further notice." But as Tejo watched the displays showing damage reports from throughout the station, he realized that the crisis went far beyond canceled meetings. The storm was affecting life support systems for multiple species, each of which required different atmospheric compositions and environmental conditions. Engineer Dong-hyun Park arrived an hour later with more detailed technical reports. His usually calm demeanor was replaced by obvious stress as he explained the scope of the problem. "The storm has damaged the primary environmental control systems," he said, highlighting affected areas on the station map. "We have methane breathing species losing atmospheric pressure in Section 7. The crystalline beings in Section 12 are experiencing dangerous temperature fluctuations. The aquatic species in Section 15 are losing water filtration." "Can't each section be repaired independently?" Tejo asked. "That's the problem. The backup systems were designed with separate controls for each species' environmental needs, but they're all connected through a central coordination network. To fix any of them, repair teams have to work together in the central environmental control room." Jinwoo studied the engineering reports. "What's preventing the repair teams from working together?" Dong-hyun's expression became even more grim. "The control room is a confined space, maybe 20 feet by 30 feet. The repair work requires precise coordination between multiple species working on interconnected systems. But with their armor requirements and spacing protocols, we can't fit enough repair specialists in there to do the job." Tejo looked at the station map and began to understand the full scope of the crisis. The environmental control room was designed for human-sized engineers working in close quarters. It had never been modified to accommodate multiple species wearing full armor while maintaining safe distances from each other. "How many different species need to be involved in the repairs?" he asked. "At least 6, Dong-hyun replied. "Kethran military engineers for the power systems, Moravian collective technicians for the atmospheric processors, Zephyrian specialists for the gravitational controls, Vorthak crystalline experts for the temperature regulators, Aquatic Federation representatives for the water systems, and human engineers to coordinate the central computer network. And they all have to work in the same room? Not just the same room. They have to work on systems that are physically connected to each other. Some of the repairs require 2 or 3 species to coordinate their actions simultaneously. The problem was unprecedented in galactic history. Never before had a crisis required such close cooperation between multiple species in a confined space. The armor protocols that allowed different civilizations to interact safely were now preventing them from saving their own lives. Emergency. Meetings were called. Representatives from each affected species gathered in the main assembly hall to discuss possible solutions. But even in the large assembly space, the delegates maintained their usual distances and spoke through their armor's communication systems. "The Kethran Empire suggests sequential repairs," announced Commander Zixathala. Each species will complete their portion of the work independently, then transfer control to the next species. Unacceptable, replied Hive Node Beta 7 through harmonic translations. The Moravian atmospheric systems cannot function independently of the gravitational controls. Coordination must be simultaneous. Ambassador Kelvosh of the Zephyrian Republic tried to find middle ground. Perhaps remote coordination through communication systems could allow simultaneous work without physical proximity. But Engineer Dong Yun shook his head. The damaged communication networks can't handle the precision required for this level of coordination. The repair work needs direct, immediate communication between team members working on connected systems. As the debate continued, Tejo watched the displays showing the station's deteriorating condition. Life support failures were spreading to new sections. The storm was intensifying, and the window for successful repairs was shrinking rapidly. What if there was someone who could coordinate the work directly? He asked suddenly. The assembly hall fell quiet. All attention turned toward the human section where Tejo was standing. What do you mean? Ambassador Kelvosh asked. Someone who could physically move between the different repair teams, relay information instantly, and provide hands-on coordination for the interconnected systems. Commander Zixathala's response was immediate. Human physical intervention is not acceptable under current protocols. The risk of contact-related trauma would be too high. But what if the alternative is death? Tejo asked bluntly. If we can't repair the life support systems, everyone on this station dies. All of our species, all of our civilization's representatives. The implications of his suggestion sent a wave of distress through the assembled delegates. Their translation systems filled the hall with worried conversations in dozens of different languages. Dr. Soman Kang, who had been observing the discussion, stepped forward. I believe the human delegate is suggesting the use of what we've termed the pack coordination protocol in our research. A human intermediary who can provide physical coordination for multi-species technical work. The psychological trauma risks are enormous, protested a Vorthak medical officer. Exposure to human pack coordination behavior could cause permanent psychological damage. And the alternative is species extinction, Dong Yun said quietly. The debate that followed was unlike anything in galactic diplomatic history. For the first time, representatives from prey species were being asked to choose between their deepest evolutionary fears and their survival needs. Species after species weighed in on the decision. Some argued that death was preferable to the psychological trauma of working alongside an apex predator. Others insisted that survival had to take priority over ancient instincts. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Princess Veltara, the young Altarian whom Tejo had saved during the diplomatic reception, requested permission to address the assembly. I have experienced direct human physical intervention, she said, her voice clear despite coming through her armor's speakers. The human delegate touched my armor and removed my helmet when I was suffocating. Yes, it triggered every fear response I possessed, but I survived, and I lived because of his actions. She paused, allowing her words to be translated for species, whose communication systems required more time to process the information. If we can overcome our fear responses for a few hours to save our lives, is that not better than dying with our fears intact? The vote was close. By a margin of only 12 votes, the Assembly authorized the use of human coordination for the emergency repairs. But the authorization came with extensive conditions: full medical monitoring for all participants, immediate termination if any species showed signs of severe trauma, and formal agreements that the human coordination would only be used for this specific crisis. As the assembly dispersed to prepare for the repairs, Tai-Ho realized that he was about to participate in the most challenging diplomatic mission in human history. He would have to coordinate repair teams from 6 different species, working in close quarters on interconnected systems, while managing the psychological trauma that his very presence would cause them. The survival of the station, and possibly the future of human-alien relations, depended on his ability to be the predator that other species needed him to be, while somehow convincing them that he was still on their side. 6 months after the successful interaction experiments, Tai-Ho had settled into a routine that seemed to be working. His daily presence in the Senate chambers no longer caused mass panic. Several young alien researchers had requested meetings to discuss the interaction studies. There was even talk of establishing formal programs to help interested aliens overcome their fear responses to humans. Then, the solar storm hit. It started as routine space weather, elevated radiation from the local star that would require minor adjustments to the station's shielding. But within hours, the storm had grown into something unprecedented. Massive waves of charged particles were overwhelming the station's protective systems, threatening to cause catastrophic failures in life support, power generation, and artificial gravity. Tai-Ho was in his quarters when the first emergency announcement echoed through the station's communication system. All personnel report to designated safety areas immediately. Critical system failures detected in multiple sections. He made his way to the human diplomatic area, where Security Chief Jinwoo Lee was coordinating emergency responses with Earth authorities. The Situation Room was filled with holographic displays showing the storm's progression and the station's failing systems. "How bad is it?" Tai-Ho asked. "Worse than anything we've seen before," Jinwoo replied grimly. "The radiation is overloading our primary shields. If we can't get the backup systems online within the next 4 hours, we'll have to evacuate the entire station." "What about the Senate session scheduled for today?" "Canceled. All diplomatic activities are suspended until further notice." But as Tai-Ho watched the displays showing damage reports from throughout the station, he realized that the crisis went far beyond canceled meetings. The storm was affecting life support systems for multiple species, each of which required different atmospheric compositions and environmental conditions. Engineer Dong-Yun Park arrived an hour later with more detailed technical reports. His usually calm demeanor was replaced by obvious stress as he explained the scope of the problem. "The storm has damaged the primary environmental control systems," he said, highlighting affected areas on the station map. "We have methane breathing, species losing atmospheric pressure in Section 7. The crystalline beings in Section 12 are experiencing dangerous temperature fluctuations. The aquatic species in Section 15 are losing water filtration." "Can't each section be repaired independently?" Tai-Ho asked. "That's the problem. The backup systems were designed with separate controls for each species' environmental needs, but they're all connected through a central coordination network. To fix any of them, repair teams have to work together in the central environmental control room." Jinwoo studied the engineering reports. "What's preventing the repair teams from working together?" Dong-Yun's expression became even more grim. "The control room is a confined space, maybe 20 feet by 30 feet. The repair work requires precise coordination between multiple species working on interconnected systems. But with their armor requirements and spacing protocols, we can't fit enough repair specialists in there to do the job." Tai-Ho looked at the station map and began to understand the full scope of the crisis. The environmental control room was designed for human-sized engineers working in close quarters. It had never been modified to accommodate multiple species wearing full armor while maintaining safe distances from each other. "How many different species need to be involved in the repairs?" he asked. "At least 6, Dong-Yun replied. Kethran military engineers for the power systems, Moravian collective technicians for the atmospheric processors, Zephyrian specialists for the gravitational controls, Vorthak crystalline experts for the temperature regulators, Aquatic Federation representatives for the water systems, and human engineers to coordinate the central computer network. And they all have to work in the same room? Not just the same room. They have to work on systems that are physically connected to each other. Some of the repairs require 2 or 3 species to coordinate their actions simultaneously. The problem was unprecedented in galactic history. Never before had a crisis required such close cooperation between multiple species in a confined space. The armor protocols that allowed different civilizations to interact safely were now preventing them from saving their own lives. Emergency. Meetings were called. Representatives from each affected species gathered in the main assembly hall to discuss possible solutions. But even in the large assembly space, the delegates maintained their usual distances and spoke through their armor's communication systems. "The Kethran Empire suggests sequential repairs," announced Commander Zixathala. "Each species will complete their portion of the work independently, then transfer control to the next species." "Unacceptable," replied Hive Node Beta 7 through harmonic translations. "The Moravian atmospheric systems cannot function independently of the gravitational controls. Coordination must be simultaneous. Ambassador Kelvash of the Zephyrian Republic tried to find middle ground. Perhaps remote coordination through communication systems could allow simultaneous work without physical proximity. But Engineer Dong-Yun shook his head. The damaged communication networks can't handle the precision required for this level of coordination. The repair work needs direct, immediate communication between team members working on connected systems. As the debate continued, Tejo watched the displays showing the station's deteriorating condition. Life support failures were spreading to new sections. The storm was intensifying, and the window for successful repairs was shrinking rapidly. What if there was someone who could coordinate the work directly? He asked suddenly. The assembly hall fell quiet. All attention turned toward the human section where Tejo was standing. "What do you mean?" Ambassador Kelvash asked. "Someone who could physically move between the different repair teams, relay information instantly, and provide hands-on coordination for the interconnected systems." Commander Zix Thala's response was immediate. "Human physical intervention is not acceptable under current protocols. The risk of contact-related trauma would be too high." "But what if the alternative is death?" Tejo asked bluntly. "If we can't repair the life support systems, everyone on this station dies. All of our species, all of our civilization's representatives." The implications of his suggestion sent a wave of distress through the assembled delegates. Their translation systems filled the hall with worried conversations in dozens of different languages. Dr. Soman Kang, who had been observing the discussion, stepped forward. "I believe the human delegate is suggesting the use of what we've termed the pack coordination protocol in our research. A human intermediary who can provide physical coordination for multi-species technical work. The psychological trauma risks are enormous," protested a Vorthak medical officer. "Exposure to human pack coordination behavior could cause permanent psychological damage. And the alternative is species extinction," Dong-Yun said quietly. The debate that followed was unlike anything in galactic diplomatic history. For the first time, representatives from prey species were being asked to choose between their deepest evolutionary fears and their survival needs. Species after species weighed in on the decision. Some argued that death was preferable to the psychological trauma of working alongside an apex predator. Others insisted that survival had to take priority over ancient instincts. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Princess Veltara, the young Altarian whom Taiho had saved during the diplomatic reception, requested permission to address the assembly. "I have experienced direct human physical intervention," she said, her voice clear despite coming through her armor's speakers. "The human delegate touched my armor and removed my helmet when I was suffocating. Yes, it triggered every fear response I possessed. But I survived, and I lived because of his actions." She paused, allowing her words to be translated for species, whose communication systems required more time to process the information. "If we can overcome our fear responses for a few hours to save our lives, is that not better than dying with our fears intact?" The vote was close. By a margin of only 12 votes, the Assembly authorized the use of human coordination for the emergency repairs. But the authorization came with extensive conditions: full medical monitoring for all participants, immediate termination if any species showed signs of severe trauma, and formal agreements that the human coordination would only be used for this specific crisis. As the Assembly dispersed to prepare for the repairs, Taiho realized that he was about to participate in the most challenging diplomatic mission in human history. He would have to coordinate repair teams from 6 different species, working in close quarters on interconnected systems, while managing the psychological trauma that his very presence would cause them. The survival of the station, and possibly the future of human-alien relations, depended on his ability to be the predator that other species needed him to be, while somehow convincing them that he was still on their side.